It is awesome to see you as well. And anybody else that wants to turn their camera on and say hi, we'd love to see your smiling faces. We also understand if you have a hat on and you'd rather stay off cam. Alice, nice to see you. Fantastic. While you're joining us, please, favorite summer spot that you vacationed in this year or are going to, or just in general that you love. Peter, good to see you as well. We're letting a few more folks in, letting Zoom catch up with us, and just jumping in and saying hi. So with that, I'll just say it again. Welcome, everybody. It's the August Strategy Collaborative. We're all back together after a month off with some smiling faces on the screen and a lot of us here today. Thanks for spending time with us this morning. And a really big thank you to Matthew, who's going to lead us through really important work today. So I'm going to do some stage setting. My name is Erica Olson. I'm the CEO and co-founder of On Strategy. I'm here on behalf of the entire On Strategy team hosting today, but it takes a village and it takes all of you. So thanks for being here, because we're creating this collaborative on behalf of everybody that's here today to raise our mastery and our collective power as strategists across the globe. So we are here from all over the place. So thank you for getting up early and thank you for staying up late. What we are talking about today is the power of psychological safety. I'm going to do a little ground setting and then I'm going to pass it to Matthew. But again, just the reason that we're here is to, as I said, raise our mastery of being strategic leaders. And that is a big job. We lead people, we lead organizations, we lead our teams, and our job is to make that big, bold vision a reality, moving organizations from where we are today to that future state. And we talk a lot about the work of strategy and OKRs and goals and all that stuff. And we also know co-equal to that, maybe even more important to all of that, is the people piece, is the behavioral piece, is the change management piece. And that's what we get to spend time on today. And so we talk about things in these 6 components. Being a great strategic leader means we're covering all of these pieces, and psychological safety is embedded in every single one of these 6. It's about having a big, bold vision, having a winning strategy, aligning your teams, having a quarterly rhythm, communicating compellingly, and having a strong culture. And all of that is about, it's about that change, and it's about the teams that we are working with to make all of those things a reality. So with that in mind, just a little bit about what's happening in August. So we're doing our first our Thursdays, always on Thursdays. So today we're doing today. Next Thursday is Pro for Strategy Collaborative. Pro members ask us anything. So that's our open mic. It's free form. The third Thursday, Matthew's going to be back with us for Pro members going deeper into this topic. So just heads up on that. He'll talk more about that as well. And that's the schedule for August. I'll recap all of that later as well. So without further ado, Matthew Oputa, North Star Evolution. The coolest thing that I love about Matthew's bio is making the world a little better every day in all of the teams that we lead and the clients we get to work with. So I know, Matthew, you're passionate about that, and we all are as well. There's Matthew's LinkedIn. I just want to give a big shout out to that. Ryan's going to drop it in chat. If you'd like to connect with Matthew, that's his LinkedIn information. So feel free to connect directly. That's how to make that happen. And stopping right there. With that, Matthew, I'm going to pass it to you.
Well, thank you for that introduction, Erica. Today, psychological safety, that's the topic. And it's one of those terms that, on the one hand, we've probably come across, but hey, what are we actually doing now? I'm doing a couple of sort of experiments with this presentation today. I'm actually going to do the entire presentation through Miro. Um, Please bear with me as we discover what might not go super great with the process because, hey, when you're trying new strategies, when you're innovating, you find out what doesn't go quite as well. And thank you for your patience with that. Um, the Miro board should be, let's get that into the chat. There's not going to be any interactive elements on the Miro board, but I find it's nice to be able to go back and look at past slides.
Matthew, I think we just lost you. Give me a head nod if you also lost Matthew. We lost Matthew. Okay, we lost Matthew. Let's give him a minute. All right, everybody, this is the coffee break time. This is the time where we say this wasn't supposed to happen, but it's happening. Okay. He'll be back with us in just a minute. Let's see. Give it a heartbeat.
And
Matthew,
sometimes Zoom crashes.
Amazing, but that's okay because that's what this is all about. So there we go. Matthew, you're back and we can hear you. Back to you.
So we're using Miro. The link hopefully is in the chat. There's not going to be any interactivity in the Miro board, but it's nice to be able to go back and see what's happened in the past. I also, well, to turn our attention to what we're doing today, first, just to kind of set the expectations for what this talk is about, I put this together as a primer. There's so much about psychological safety, including just in the past year, there have been so many articles coming out, think pieces coming out. What I'm trying to do with this is give you a little bit of each stage so that you can either begin applying it right away or dive into it a little bit deeper. I actually have a whole list of resources that will get sent out to the collaborative. Now, the first topic that we're touching on is, well, just the classic, hey, what is this? What is psychological safety? What does it mean? And then we're going to touch a little bit on, well, why do we care? What's the impact? And we're going to look at what the factors that contribute to psychological safety are, as well as the corollary, what contributes to psychological unsafety, that lack of safety. Finally, what do you do as a leader? That we'll touch on in just a moment. The assumptions that I made in preparing this is that I'm assuming that you're a leader. But I also am very comfortable with that broad definition of, yeah, we're all leaders in some way, shape, or form. If we're a junior member of a team, we still have the ability to influence that team by bringing our ideas forward, mentioning things, and of course, all the easier with psychological safety. Now, I'm also assuming that you believe that sharing ideas, raising concerns, I assume we're already on the same page that these are good things. We're in teams. We have ideas. Sharing those ideas, that's the point of a team. I'm also assuming that you believe that asking questions, admitting mistakes is a net gain. Mistakes happen. That's life. You can't learn from something that you try to hide, though. So I'm not going to try to prove any of those things. I'm going to hope that we are on the same page already. As far as the format goes, this is mostly didactic. There is going to be some interaction. I'm going to have you chime into chat. I try to keep a close eye on that. So like Erica says, pop questions in, raise ideas. I'll answer them on the fly as best I can, and we'll get to anything that I miss at the end. There will also be some nonverbal interaction components, so feel free to do that as well. Speaking of which, I need to reopen my participants list so I can see your nonverbal reactions. To tease the third Thursday, the 17th. This is for pro members only, but we are going to be doing a deeper dive on specifically the actions to take, some tools to use, and the mindsets to adopt that help build psychological safety in a team, organization, and in relationships. So little background on me. I'm a business advisor. You can call me a business coach. You can call me a business consultant, whatever term resonates with you. I do always like to share some sort of weird fact about me. A while ago, I decided that, I didn't want to be afraid of spiders anymore. And now I've kind of gone in the other way. I'm mildly obsessed with spiders. That does mean that I am always good for a random spider fact, which is either really great or really terrible at parties. I haven't decided yet. If you are on the video, there is a quick little intro video there that I shot precisely 1 week ago with the wonderful Alice Grindling of Terraform Entertainment. Thank you for your help on that, Alice. Using the classic CSO collaborative question, call me when you want to build patterns in your organization to establish psychological safety. So first things first, let's put psychological safety aside. Why do we have physical safety standards? Drop in the chat. What is the reason for having physical safety standards? In the picture that I chose, he's got a bunch of PPE equipment. He's got a respirator. He's got a full suit. Looks like there's some sort of fall harness. Okay, to keep people safe, to protect workers, to prevent injuries. Yeah, we have physical safety standards to prevent physical injuries. Reasons there? Well, obviously, we don't want people to get hurt if we have any sense of ethical or moral obligation. We don't want people to be hindered by the fear of getting hurt. Managing risk, yeah. When people get hurt, that affects productivity, which affects the bottom line. Not all of the reasons for physical safety are altruistic. Some of them are sheer practical business decisions. It is more profitable to be safe. This has been firmly established. So, psychological safety, this is the definition that is most broadly shared around in the Zeitgeist. It's marginally credited to Amy Edmondson, who is a fairly prominent figure in psychological safety, though this quote itself comes from an article about her. It's a shared belief. It wouldn't be me talking if I didn't bring up shared understandings. Psychological safety is this shared understanding, the shared belief that people can take risks, have and share ideas, express concerns, ask questions, and admit when they're wrong. And here's the key. It's all without the fear of negative consequences. I bolded that word fear this morning because I realized that what disquieted me about this slide was I didn't have that bolded. And psychological safety, it's about the fear of it. Doesn't matter if there are negative consequences or not. It's the perception, that concern, that fear. I do see some questions in the chat about more information and resources. So much of that is coming your way. The way that I like to think about psychological safety is a slightly different take that just condenses the ideas down a little bit. To me, it's about patterns of behavior. These patterns that allow us to be vulnerable without a fear of social injury. A second ago, we were talking about physical safety standards. and how they prevent physical injury. Physical injury that has downstream consequences, both morally and ethically, consequences for the individual and consequences for productivity, for the risk of the organization. Psychological safety is the same, but much harder to spot. Now, this pyramid may seem familiar to fans of On Strategy's YouTube channel. I first learned about this from Erica long before the CSO Collaborative and long before I thought I was clever enough to be presenting for you all today. This is from Change the Culture, Change the Game, and it's a culture change model to conceptualize how cultures work. See, we all have experiences. In the context of psychological safety, well, if I admit that I made a mistake, what happens? What do I experience? Do I experience something negative? Do people give me the cold shoulder? Am I reprimanded for having made a mistake? Or is it something more positive? Do we say, oh, well, how can we learn from this? What can we learn from this? Once I have those experiences, then I have beliefs about, well, what's going to happen the next time? What's going to happen in the future? Those beliefs, once they're formed, inform my actions. What do I actually do? Next time I make a mistake, do I call it out and ask for help as soon as I know so that, hey, maybe we can recover from the mistake, mitigate any damages, learn something more effective? Or do I cover it up and try to make it go away? That yields the results. If we don't learn from our risks, or from our mistakes rather, well, what do we do instead? Probably repeat them. Now, a lot of the ideas that I've brought up so far, and a lot of the ones that we're going to look at, they're probably going to sound fairly familiar. As I was getting ready for this, I kept getting a sense of deja vu. And at first I thought it's because, well, I've been reading about psychological safety for about 10 years now, but I realized that no, these ideas, these concepts are used in other frameworks. OKRs have the CFRs, I think it is, conversations, feedback, recognition. And if you read about the idea about how those are supposed to go, well, it's about learning. They're supposed to be positive, and they're supposed to engender psychological safety. In innovation thinking, safe place to fail, fail fast, fail cheap. Well, you can't fail fast, fail cheap unless you admit that you've failed, which requires psychological safety. Building learning organizations, I actually sourced some of this material, some of these ideas from talks about learning organizations specifically. They don't mention psychological safety at all. And those of us who have gone through either facilitation or coaching training, so much of that is about psychological safety in a group environment or in an individual environment. So what matters? Why do we care about this? We're strategy leaders. And if we're not strategy leaders, we're at least interested in strategy because, we're on a strategy collaborative. Well, there are three main components to strategy. Strategy development, actually building your strategy. Implementation, actually deploying that strategy. And the ethical behavior of the organization is something that also just kind of keeps coming up over and over again because, well, if your strategy is being executed through unethical means, is that a win? Is that what your organization wants? Hopefully not. Again, I like making the world a better place, which does require some level of ethical behavior. So let's look at what do we need for strategy development. First, we need that problem areas are identified and identified early. Well, that requires brainstorming. in the chat, who always has good ideas during brainstorming sessions? Never had a bad one. I'm guessing not very many. Brainstorming is about having ideas, examining them, and then prioritizing them. Most of the calls on the CSO Collaborative bring into place some level of prioritization because we need to have new ideas. We need to be innovative, which requires some level of, hey, let's figure something out new that hasn't been done before. Take risks. Of course, we need team members to contribute in order to accomplish that. And we need the team to own the strategy. Well, if people don't feel comfortable bringing new ideas forward because, oh, that's not a good idea. Oh, no, we can't do that. That's impossible. How are they going to bring forward the next idea? How are we going to have the conversations about these ideas to refine them to a point where, hey, yeah, that's exactly what we need? That is where psychological safety has its impact. In strategy implementation, hey, who's written a plan and then 3 months later you found out that it was mostly incorrect? That happens. We try to avoid it, but you know what? We're not soothsayers. We don't predict the future. We need to be able to bring forward that, hey, this plan, there were some incorrect assumptions. When there are new problems that emerge, we need to be able to identify, call them out, bring them forward. And we need the teams to continue to own the strategy. Just because it was owned during development doesn't mean it's owned during implementation. But, you know, if a plan is going sideways and the only thing that matters is success, who's going to want to own a plan that can't be changed, that can't adapt to the times? If there's that threat of social injury, how are people going to behave? What actions will they take? This last one, I was actually surprised in my research. There was a study not too long ago. And in an organization, of course, we want people to behave ethically so that decisions are true to our vision, true to that greater good. We need ethical concerns to be addressed, and we need ethical concerns to be raised in order for them to be addressed. And what surprised me was, this was an article in Sloan Management Review that will be linked to later, that found that organizations that have higher psychological safety then have not only a lower incidence of ethical issues raised, but people reported feeling more comfortable raising them. Conversely, organizations with a lower psychological safety, people didn't feel comfortable reporting ethical concerns when they saw them, and they reported that they saw more of them. The methodology of that particular study is contained in the article. And again, that will be linked to in the end. The title of the article is Ethical Conduct Through Psychological Safety. So let's do a quick simulation. I'm hoping you can help me out real quick. Those on Zoom, find the nonverbal feedback for me. Go down to its reactions at the bottom of your Zoom window. Just hit the yes button for me. And those who are not live on the Zoom call with us, this is something that you can do on your own. Just get inside your head. Think about this honestly. I'm seeing a bunch of people saying yes. Thank you so much. So this is one of those nonverbal feedback. So what I want you to do right now, just kind of take a deep breath, get inside your head. I want you to pay attention to how you're feeling. How do you feel right now? I'm feeling calm, feeling a little on edge. Right now, take a moment and reflect. How many people are on this call? There's 84 people on the Zoom call. Now, Erica, how many people are watching the live stream on YouTube?
I don't actually know, but I'll have Hayden throw that into chat.
Okay. I'm going to guess a bunch.
14. There we go.
We got 14 on the live stream. So hey, we're at 100 people live. And how many people are going to watch this on YouTube later? This is being recorded. We're posting it. Now, take a moment and reflect. What are the consequences if you said something foolish on this call? How would that impact you personally? How would that impact your ego, your career? What would happen? Now, using that nonverbal feedback back down in reactions, who is willing to come on camera, on mic, and answer some tough questions that I have prepared for you? They're going to be hard. Who wants to do that? I'm seeing a bunch of yeses disappear. I'm seeing a few brave souls that did, in fact, change their answer to yes. I applaud your gumption. I see a few of you are cheating because you already know what I'm doing here. But I want everyone to think, what did that feel like? What was your emotional reaction to the idea of going live in front of 100 peers to be immortalized on YouTube? Yeah. Bob, one of the people who changed his answer to yes. His answer was gulp. Here goes. Someone mentions feeling vulnerable. Yeah, it's intimidating. So, oh, imposter syndrome, one of my favorite topics. Yeah, it's stressful. So what are the consequences to the people on a project team standing in front of a leadership board when they're asked to speak up? How do they feel? That is a practical example of psychological safety. I was talking to Erica earlier. I get nervous every single time I give a presentation, no matter what size. Doesn't matter. I've been doing it for 10, 15 years now. Every time I get nervous. But what keeps me going is, well, I give talks, I give presentations in groups that are supportive, that care, that have a common goal. Because if I don't have that, well, what's the risk? We're going to examine some of these ideas a little bit more. These are just a few factors to think about when it comes to psychological safety, how you're going to build psychological safety. These are just things that factor in. I want to emphasize here, remember, psychological safety, it's not a framework. It's a series of ideas, concepts. These are some of them. What happens when you speak up? What happens when you just raise your hand to say something? Or what happens when you say, oh, I don't think that figure is correct? Is it rewarded? Is it punished? Is it a cool reaction? Also consider what happens when you fail. When you come to your team and say, hey, that didn't go well, I didn't succeed in that goal. Is it met with derision? Is it met with, hey, we can learn from this? What's actually incentivized? It's one thing to say, oh, we are a learning organization. We value personal development, growth, learning from our failures. Hey, it's okay to fail here. Who gets promoted? Are the people who are promoted exclusively those who have nothing but successful projects? In which case, is it a learning organization? Is it safe to fail if the evidence shows that, well, you're not going to get promoted if you have the gall to admit that you're wrong like everybody else sometimes? If you try to actually learn, if you try to hold true to the organizational values, if that's not what's incentivized, then that's not actually the culture. There's not actually that psychological safety. This last one, this was specifically the point of that little simulation. What's to gain? What's to lose? What's the risk? A few of you pointed out. Well, what's to gain is you're on camera for a little bit. You're on YouTube. Maybe you'll end up with a clip that you can share on social media. What's to lose is, well, I mean, I'm asking tough questions. You don't even know what those questions are. Maybe it's going to be embarrassing. Consequences are vital, someone says in the chat. Failure isn't the end of the world, but if you do the best with what you have at the time, yeah, that's learning. But does everybody else feel that way? Does the organization, do the patterns in the organization reflect that? One wild card that I want to share, this is something that I just came across earlier this year, and I find it absolutely fascinating. It's a slight divergence from what we're talking about, but I feel like this has very clear implications for psychological safety. There was a study came out earlier this year. There will be a link to the article that I'm referencing. It has to do with the meaning of words. The study found that from the sample group, they selected 2 people at random and asked them questions about, well, what's a penguin? What's the concept of a penguin? And only about 12% of the time did these two people agree on the concept of what a penguin is. Now, if we can't agree what a penguin is like, what other words do we not quite have the same definitions of? Again, this is a slight tangent from what else we're talking about, but it's something that I wanted to bring up because as you're navigating these conversations, as you're trying to build psychological safety, something to think about. Since I read about this in March or April, I haven't been able to get it out of my head. And it's informed a good number of interactions since then. So let's turn our attention to practical things, the things we can do. Again, this is assuming that you have some level of power, authority as a leader, but if you're not in that position, if you're a team member, if you're a more junior member, then knowing these things is still helpful. And if nothing else, you can share it up, share it with your team if the environment permits. So the first thing to do, acknowledge that there are power dynamics and that they affect people. If you're facilitating a strategic planning session and you ask a rhetorical question and then somebody answers the question because, I mean, it was a question and, rhetorical questions get answered sometimes. But, oh, you weren't even expecting an answer. And so you respond in sort of I don't know, a cool way, not really even acknowledging that they contributed to the conversation. Well, that kind of derails people wanting to speak up, doesn't it? That actually happened to me a few months ago. I asked a rhetorical question and somebody said something and it surprised me and I acknowledged it, but in hindsight, not as well as I could have. And talking to him, he didn't feel like he could speak up very well in the future. I was able to smooth that over, but I had about a quarter of a second to decide exactly how I was going to respond. And my words were good, but my tone, not so much. Beyond that, in an organizational context, this is a study done by Sloan Management Review. Managers and leaders felt more psychologically safe than their employees. I forget the sample size, but it was in the thousands and it was multinational. Those with power, those with authority within the organization felt more psychologically safe in the organization, which means that there was a disconnect between those that needed the psychological safety to meaningfully contribute to the growth of the organization and those that actually created the environment. Next, simply how you say things matters. I already used that example of just using the wrong tone in a split-second decision as I was facilitating something, because those mistakes have consequences. Fortunately, I was able to recognize it, smooth it over. It wasn't a continual problem after that, but hey, we're leaders, we've got a lot going on. It's easy to miss these things. A classic example that has come up for me several times in rhetoric is, well, why questions versus what questions? We all know about the 5 whys. Ask why 5 times to get to the bottom of things. Okay, so you make a decision, you do a thing. Oh, why'd you do that? You have to justify why you did that. That's what the question is. So as a leader, what if we change the question around? What if instead we say, well, oh, what went into this decision? Then it is a factual recounting of the selection criteria for that decision. It's not about justifying the action, it's about explaining the thought process. That's what we're after, isn't it? We're not asking questions as leaders to get people to defend themselves. It's about understanding. These next two are straight from David Marquet, especially related to leadership as language. Someone proposes a course of action. Oh, are you sure? What are you supposed to say to that? Oh, of course I'm sure. You hired me to be capable and confident. And so I'm going to be capable and confident when you ask me if I'm capable and confident, whether or not it's true. What if we turn it around and say, oh, well, how sure are you? I'm about 80% sure of this plan. Okay. Well, that's a lot different than, oh, yes, I'm sure. I'm sure says, oh, yeah, 100%. But if there's a 20% gap in that confidence, well, maybe we should look into that. When we as leaders propose something, oh, does that make sense to everyone? Nobody wants to be the one who doesn't get it. Instead, ask, oh, well, what am I missing? Because guess what? No matter how long you've been doing this, no longer how long you've been a leader, you've missed something. This psychological safety is about establishing the patterns that lead to the results you want. I get a lot of mileage out of this little triangle here. What patterns have you built to create experiences, to inform beliefs, to inform actions, to yield results? Bob brings up, I often find that why questions about the past bring defensiveness and why questions about the present and future bring curiosity. Absolutely. The present is still ongoing. The future is purely hypothetical. There's nothing to justify. There are some things to justify in the present, so still be careful. Still consider what questions as an additional option. One trap that comes up in psychological safety is there's a difference between you as the leader thinking that it's there and the other person feeling that it's there. Now, again, this wouldn't be a talk by me if I didn't bring up team agreements, shared understandings. This particular one is used in WD-40. If you're unfamiliar with Gary Ridge, WD-40, look into it. It's a fascinating guy, fascinating situation. He describes the company that he is the CEO of as selling, quote, oil in a can. So how do you innovate? How do you thrive as an organization that has literally one product? What he did is, and as far as I understand it, he created the Maniac Pledge itself. It's unclear if he sourced it elsewhere. But this is a team agreement, a shared understanding about who's responsible for communication. If you read it, well, each person is responsible for taking action. Each person is responsible to ask questions. So when they ask a question, it's not them asking a question, it's them fulfilling their responsibility. Shared understandings like this, when they're abided by, are perfect for building psychological safety. Yep. These are 3 tools that I wanted to share. The first 2 have come up repeatedly for me in facilitation training. The first is a simple spectrum. Now I have thumbs down, thumbs up on this particular spectrum. And of course, this is a virtual whiteboard. You can do this just as well on a dry erase board or just on a wall with some sticky notes. Hey, how do we feel about this? Okay, well, oh, hedgehog feels good. Goat's right here. All right, we've got, all right, rabbit's there, but oh, the squirrel's over here. Well, now we know that there's questions to be asked. Or maybe the original question was, how confident do you feel about your knowledge about this topic? Fist of 5 is a similar idea. Hey, how do we feel about the chance of success of this plan? When you know your personal answer, raise your fist up. And on the count of 3, give us your number, 1 to 5. It's very quick. It's very simple. It's a simple poll that does several things. It means that each person is coming up to their own answer. It means that it's not a binary question. It's that how sure are you rather than are you sure? It lets people express that I'm not 100% on this without having to say I'm not 100% on this. This last item, dissent cards, that's the term used in leadership leadership is language for this particular model. The idea is that, okay, at the beginning of meetings, everybody draws a card. One of those cards is red. If you draw the red card, you are required to dissent. Fans of World War Z, the novel and the book, will recognize that same required dissent idea as, I think they call it the 10th man rule. I understand that actually has true background in Israeli intelligence practices. By requiring dissent, it's not somebody saying, oh, I disagree with this. It's their role. It's their agreement. They're doing it because that's what's been asked of them. Therefore, it is safe for them to do. Well, conveniently, since that was the last slide, I've lost my own connection to Miro. So
As
let's
have
take the
I.
blessing.
That was
Okay,
awesome.
fantastic. Well, the only slide left is one that says questions with a question mark and a kind of summary roundup slide. So let's turn our attention to questions.
So I'm going to ask a question on behalf of, I think Bob asked it quite a bit earlier, so it's way up higher in chat. Matthew, you shared the example of WD-40, but also maybe can you give another example or share some indications that we might be looking for in organizations that do exhibit psychological safety? And I think the slide that you had with the pyramid in relation to change the culture, change the game is really powerful in the context of patterns, and patterns are often unseen, but felt, as we know. And so just wondering if you could just, if off the top of your head, other examples of what we're looking for when we know we're in an organization that has high psychological safety.
It's a challenging thing to measure because it's so deeply rooted in how people feel. And well, if it's not a safe place to raise concerns, are you going to say that it's not a safe place to raise concerns? So there is always going to be a level of check and recheck. If people are open about failures, if people are open about having made mistakes, and if people are willing to say, yeah, no, I'm sorry, this doesn't make any sense to me, those are great indicators because it means that they feel comfortable doing that. Now,
Awesome.
to take it the next layer down, who is comfortable doing that? Because if it's not everyone, then it's only some. And again, there's a power dynamic. If only the people that have been there for 10 years and can't be replaced feel comfortable doing that, what about the people that are concerned about becoming unemployed? Because if they don't feel safe doing it, then it's not fully psychologically safe there.
Awesome, Matt, that's awesome. That's great. I have another question for you that's maybe percolating for some folks that are on the phone as well. Is you gave some really specific ideas that we're going to be sharing in the other slides about how to reframe questions and those type of things. I'm wondering if there's another like prompt or just another thing that you might want to put in our minds so we can shine a mirror on ourselves to say, are we creating a psychologically safe environment? Because you're right, you know, we're running sessions, we're in front of people, there's a lot going on, and if there's just kind of a little prompt that you use, or maybe just a little like sort of like trigger that we can use to help ourselves be thoughtful about creating a psychologically safe environment. Do you have any suggestions on that?
I'll introduce two. The easy one is just, if the question that you want to ask is why, change it to what. Figure out how to word it as a what question. That's a relatively easy one to spot because you can do it on the fly without any sort of preparation, though you will stumble a little bit while you try to figure out how to translate the question that you're asking. A deeper one, this comes from the podcast Coaching for Leaders by Dave Stachowiak. The advice is, well, these are patterns, these are habits. But when you're employing them, it's in a situation where you're paying attention to something else. So prepare. Today, I am going to ask 5 what questions. Going into this interaction, I'm guessing that I'm probably going to need to ask, why was this the decision made? And so I'm going to prepare my script for a what question. Continue to plan ahead to do certain small actions. You then build that habit.
Super helpful. Matthew, we have a question. And we have probably time for like two or three more, so feel free to put them in chat, by the way, everybody. But could you just explain the dissent card one more time?
Absolutely. So at the beginning of a meeting, you have a deck of cards. Most of them are black, one of them are red, or maybe 2 or 3 of them are red. It's an arbitrary decision how many. My gut tells me focus on one, but I don't have any evidence on that. Everybody draws a card. One person has that red card. If everybody is on board with a decision, oh yeah, this is a good idea, we should do this. Whoever has the red card has to argue against that decision, has to argue against that idea. That's not to say that nobody else can. It's just that the person with the red card has to disagree. To tie it with the, I mentioned the 10th man rule. The way I understand the origin of that is Israeli intelligence in the 70s had some fairly high profile and very consequential failures. And so they introduced a doctrine that said that, hey, if everybody is agreeing that a situation is this way, one person has to actively prepare for the opposite of that or something different than that, so that there is a dissenting view. We're not all just in that echo chamber of, oh yeah, this is what's happening. It's a way
Yeah,
to
that's awesome.
introduce required dissent so that you can just do it safely. There aren't negative consequences because it's expected.
Perfect. Anthony's asking a question. Thoughts on how to create or move to more psychological safety when time constraints are large and results are required quickly? Yeah, great question.
Start before the constraints are in place is the obvious and super unhelpful answer. Their patterns take time to develop. They take time to undevelop. If you are facing those constraints, focus on that spectrum exercise. The reason that I included that is I've used it in multiple workshops just to find out, hey, where are we? How are people thinking about this? How are people feeling about this? And I've been surprised by the results every single time. Hey, is everybody, you feel confident in the ideas we've talked about so far? I thought that they were, and turns out a couple of them weren't. The Fist of Five, great one. That is, in fact, if you take away nothing else, look into that one, use that one. You can do it immediately in any situation. Here's the plan. Okay, how confident are we in this plan? Put your fists up, good. You can immediately get feedback very, very quickly in that situation. And again, you're asking for a rating.
Awesome.
So someone says 1 when you're hoping it's a 5.
And Matthew, we posted some other examples of that from a YouTube video and chat as well, just so people can really see that in action. So Lynn, thank you for that. I've got one more question, but before I do, Lynn added the thought too, it could be interesting to have advocate cards and a few dissent cards. So that's kind of an interesting way to think about the dissent and advocate thing as well. So super cool. But one more question before we go to that slide, Matthew, is Kristen's asking, when you have a senior leader who often shuts down conversation with their language, how do you facilitate reopening the conversation?
Does the senior leader want to open conversation? That's the first answer. If the language being used is the issue, that's the issue to address. But they have to be on board. Change happens from the top. An organization can't be fully psychologically safe unless the senior leaders want it to be. Think about it in terms of parenting. Parents set the patterns that the children learn. Same thing's going to happen in an organization. Now, that's not to say that you can't do it. It means that it's going to be not ideal. It's going to be less effective. Ways to reopen conversations are to first address that, hey, that kind of shut things down. Move to tools like spectrums. anonymous feedback so that that information can be collected, the conversation can continue, but in a way that reduces that risk to people. Instead of saying, okay, hey, raise your hand with a new idea, even though you just got shut down with one. Don't do that. Instead say, all right, well, let's break, come up with ideas, submit them anonymously on cards, and then we're going to talk about it. We don't even need to know who brought the idea forward. What we're going to talk about on the 17th, there are going to be a lot of tools there that would be potentially applicable in that situation.
That's awesome, Matthew. And we're just sort of like getting our feet wet with this topic as well. And I just want to say, on behalf of everybody, and we can use our reactions, big round of applause to Matthew. And the prep was awesome on this, and it was super fun to see Miro in action. So just big round of applause. I know everybody's feeling the same way. And also just giving us, like for me, and I suspect a lot of us right now are just really processing and thinking about how do we raise our awareness and start to employ even just the way that we change our language. And I just love that thought, Matthew, that you're just giving all of us to that. We just need to slow down and prepare, particularly for those sessions that we know we need to put some attention on as it relates to creating psychological safety. And particularly if we're in a fast-paced environment, we probably even need to put more attention there too, because things are moving fast. So much to talk about here. A bunch of stuff on the screen right now as well. We will share this, of course. But just to kind of comment, we will be next, you saw the schedule, but I'm going to recap it. So next Thursday, 8 a.m. Pacific time, Ask Me Anything. So that's open mic. The following Thursday, which is the 17th at 10 a.m. Pacific time, we'll be going deeper into more tools and techniques and just approaches. And Matthew kind of shared a little bit about what that might look like. So please don't miss it. For pro members, we're really going to workshop it, and just so many great resources. Matthew, I'll pass it back to you for any last minute closing comments as we wrap it up.
Absolutely. I've seen some follow-up questions in the chat. I am going to use those to modify the 17th to hopefully help address those follow-on questions. Certainly add anything else into the chat that questions, comments, or concerns about any of this. And I'll certainly try to incorporate that on the 17th. And that feedback form is also a great place to send me feedback. It's a simple form and I read it myself. So let me know.
So great. So we'll be sending a post session email. It will have a link to this Miro board, all of these resources as well. It will have a link to Matthew's LinkedIn as well. So again, please make sure to connect. Grab all this and look for it, grab that email, make sure that you file it in your system. And so you have these resources at your fingertips. This is also recorded, so you'll get a link to that as well. So with that, we always promise to end on time. So we're ending on time. We'll stay here for a minute if there's follow-on questions. Have an amazing rest of the week. And we'll see everybody next Thursday. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being a member of the collaborative. Matthew, thank you so much. That was amazing.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Matthew, that was
So,
great.
throw out, see if Kristen is still on it. We could bring that conversation live on that last question that a lot of people have found interested. I don't just seeing if she's still on or not.
I think she's
yeah, that was the senior leader question, I think.
Yeah, I think she jumped. Yeah, we should take that up again. We can take that up again on the next session
Yeah,
too. That was
absolutely.
fantastic. That's
Something
great.
something to I think what she mentioned is that it's a habit, it's not the intention. And yeah, habits, patterns, that's what gets you.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Matthew, that was fantastic. Oh, Hayden has a question from YouTube because we're still live streaming. Hayden, go for it.
Can you do a quick example of a scenario with dissent cards?
A scenario with dissent cards.
How you would do it?
Yeah, so we'll go with, let's have a strategic planning session around a specific issue. And at the beginning, yeah, we draw the cards, somebody has the red card, and it's known that they have the red card. There's no reason to keep it secret. In fact, I would argue probably better to not have it secret, have it be open. From there, okay, we're going through the process, and the person with the red card, the dissent card, sees that, all right, hey, everybody in the room is on board with this. There is no dissent. Time to go to work. Time to argue against an idea. Of course, at the appropriate time, assuming we're past the, all right, we're just bringing the ideas forward. You know, this isn't something to use during brainstorming. Brainstorming is about putting the ideas out. But when it's time to refine, say, all right, hey, nobody else is organically dissenting to this. It is now my duty to dissent. It is now my job to come up with ways to argue against this idea. And from there, that conversation starts. Now, in that same situation where, okay, yeah, we're refining ideas and there is dissent, the person with the red card doesn't necessarily have to chime in with dissent because dissent's happening organically. Now, I will say this is not, that exact model, that exact way of doing things is not taken from Leadership is Language. That is not David Marquet's exact way of doing it. That is my own interpretation of it.
No, but the point on that's a really good one. And not only is that programming different perspectives, but also really ensuring that groupthink doesn't happen, right? I mean, I think there's so much power in that thought process. And I always use the ground rule, use the power of dissent, but this is taking it quite a bit further to really prompting that, which is so cool. So, and love that idea that Lynn brought up too, is maybe there are blue cards for advocate cards. So, you know, that's kind of taking a different tact on it as well. So kind of
Absolutely love that.
Interesting variation, both of course, because that's the point, but yeah. So yeah, and Taffy saying two sides, that's right. More of every idea. That's absolutely correct. So we'll stay on for just one more minute or so. If anybody has any other questions you want to shoot at Matthew.
I do have a question quickly for Matthew. Hi, everyone. This is Tanal. Thanks for a great session as always. Thank you. I had a situation a few years back with a CEO about psychological safety. He gave feedback publicly on Slack, and you know, it wasn't taken very well by the team member or the extended team. And when I gave him that feedback in private, he didn't take it well either. And he felt like it was his position to, you know, give that harsh feedback to make sure that mistakes were not being made. At what level do you, like, when is it okay to make mistakes and give that feedback? And when do you say, okay, this is not, you know, conducive to the psychological safety of the organization? Like, where's the line there?
Before I answer the question of, well, where's the line? Which battles do you pick? The way you phrase that is, well, the CEO said that it was his job to make sure that mistakes don't happen. Was the action, so that's his intent. Was the action taken ensuring that mistakes don't happen, or was the action taken ensuring that mistakes aren't admitted to? There's a very, very big and very important difference between those two. And his intent, totally fine.
His intent was to make sure that that mistake doesn't happen again.
Yes. Our intents are not always the same as our actions. Our actions are not always in alignment with our intent. that is first and foremost the message that I would share with this leader. Your intention is fine, but that's not necessarily how it was received. And similarly, I feel statements. The team felt attacked, or whatever verb you want to use there. Well, okay. There's no discussion there. That's how they felt. Now, to your question of, well, where's the line? And that line comes down to what's the plan? What is the organizational culture? What is the agreement with this leader? If a leader is stalwartly refusing to hear feedback because it bruises their ego, how are you supposed to do that? There's navigating prickly leaders, navigating challenges in a team is deeply complicated, and there's often more nuance than anything else. It all starts with, well, what is the agreement? Does the CEO want the place to be psychologically safe, or something else?
Yeah, I guess that's the key question there. He wants it to be psychologically safe, but it was a journey to get him to see what that means in terms of intent and action. Thank you. That's very helpful. I like the I feel question or statements there. Thank you.
Absolutely, my pleasure.
But that's really interesting too, and it's a really great question that you asked, and just that notion of, and maybe to your point, Matthew, on how the power of agreements, and we would all agree on the power of agreements, and that being intentional with those statements and creating those agreements, and what we do when we don't have those agreements means we're kind of on shaky ground when we end up in a situation like we just talked about, right? And so yeah, I was just to comment on that, because if we're trying to engender that kind of shift, we might consider leading upward in the context of trying to support the concept of creating agreements, so that when we get into situations like this, there's already an understanding on how to handle it in this situation. You can feel a little bit out there and unsupported, and quite frankly, insubordinate if you're stepping into that space, right? If those agreements aren't stated in advance. So anyways, just some thoughts on that. So
yeah. And I'll add on to that. Psychological safety applies to the leaders as well. They're even as the person in power,
right?
No one likes to be told that they were wrong. No one. Some people like to talk about how, I love failing. No, people hate failing. People like learning from it. But in order to learn from it, you need to be able to be in the right mindset to examine how things played out, how actions happened. And if you're not in that space where it's a safe place for that to happen, even as a leader, it becomes very challenging.
That's absolutely correct. That's great. Well, everybody, a lot to think about, Matthew. Thank you. And we'll leave it here for now. We'll pick it back up in 2 weeks' time. I have a feeling that a lot of us are going to come back with a lot of observations over the next 2 weeks to dig into. So that's going to be awesome. Thank you. Have an amazing rest of the week, everybody. And we'll see you next Thursday and the following Thursday as well. A big round of applause, Matthew. And thank you for just, again, all these amazing resources too. So have a great week, everyone. We'll see you next time.